He recalled that he was once an ordinary office worker until a sudden realization turned his life upside down. The young man looked at his reflection in the mirror in amazement, realizing that he had turned into a chubby child. The stunned boy loudly asked who this man was in front of him, and the dark-haired interlocutor thought about what was happening. Then the guy looked around the room and the landscape outside the window, wondering at the same time where exactly he ended up. The young man realized he had missed the last train, struggling to keep his balance, and the girl standing next to him thought that this place was completely different from Japan and did not even belong to their era. The youth screamed in panic, wondering if he had died and been reborn again, while the scene of the collision with the truck was depicted behind him. Soon the girl nervously knocked on the door, stuttered, said her name and asked to come in. The maid called out to Klaus politely, inquiring about his condition, and he mentally noted that he had heard the name Klaus somewhere before. The girl screamed in fright, and the guy immediately apologized for screaming and, doubting whether he had frightened her, asked about the schedule for today. After this, the young man learned that Lotte Erling, his fiancée, would arrive that afternoon, and, with a trembling voice, he confirmed his name, Klaus Müller, and began to understand the essence of this world. The boy stared at the cover of the game Supernova Gnosis, which he had recently started playing, with a dumbfounded look. The young man nervously recalled that the main character's name was Lotte, and in his imagination he saw her shining image. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man, having settled himself in the chair, loudly and mockingly pronounced the name Klaus Müller. Klaus attacked the heroines again and again, but the main character protected them, gradually getting closer to them and becoming close to them. Then the boy happily remembered how Klaus had been nicknamed the affection enhancer in the Gnosis community, and the girl standing next to him watched his reaction in bewilderment. The frightened girl called out to Klaus, and he, hearing the accusation that he was a cruel fat man, began to deny what had been said with horror. The guy worriedly asked if everything was okay with her, but she irritably waved him off, declaring that she didn't like overweight people at all, causing him genuine bewilderment. He soon noticed her excessively thin legs and realized that she had clearly been eating poorly, feeling guilty about the cruelty he might have committed against her. The young man apologized to Anna with sincere regret for the inconvenience he had caused, and she reacted with unexpected surprise and confusion. After this, the guy carefully offered food to the tearful Anna, saying that she was too exhausted and needed to eat more, which touched her heart quite a bit. The guy happily announced that he had indeed been reborn, emphasizing that this was not a deception, and that from this day on a new life began. The girl, her eyes full of tears, was gently asked to stop crying, and she quietly agreed, looking up and answering in a trembling voice. Then the boy suddenly announced that he was going to go on a diet and go for a little run, and then abruptly ran outside, surprising his interlocutor, who had tried to stop him before Lotte arrived. The young man, out of breath, ran to the huge mansion, amazed by its size and remembering that this is exactly how it looked in the game. After this, the narrator explained that the family of Duke Müller lived in the eastern part of the kingdom of Garluck, and nearby there should be the estate of the family of Count Erling, to which Lotte belonged. The boy complained that the distance was too great for neighborhood, breathing heavily and mentally cursing the vastness of the garden. Meanwhile, the determined young man, having reached the right place, looked around and excitedly ordered the status menu to be opened in the game world. He was going through possible keywords like skill, interface, and open status, and the character standing next to him reacted with unexpected surprise. The boy quickly opened the book and summoned a glowing skill book, happily preparing to test his abilities. He soon began to study the contents closely, noting that the level and proficiency stats matched, and wondering if the skill's effect increased with level. The character read that his skill book contained a unique ability called Lazy Slumber, which improved with excessive sleep and granted natural healing while resting. The young man recoiled, exclaiming to himself that his usual skill was really lazy sleep, and wondered if he would start to gain weight if he just slept. Then the boy decided to hide his find so as not to cause problems, and, having made his decision, he headed back, walking slowly. Soon he joyfully arrived at the carriage and, straightening his waistcoat, stood confidently while several adults and maids watched him from the side. The girl, meanwhile, noted that Lotte looked surprisingly young, but her beauty always remained unchanged, standing in the softly lit room, lost in thought. The boy vividly recalled the character named Sovereign Beauty from the game, and his enthusiasm grew again at the sight of the familiar image on the screen. Then he joyfully extended his hand to the embarrassed girl, begging her to take his palm, and quickly came closer. But the girl quietly retreated, and the boy asked if he had done something wrong, while several onlookers watched the scene closely from afar. The young lady held out her hand tremblingly, hesitating internally, and the other noticed that she was clearly forcing herself. Soon the two children were sitting at a table in the garden while the maids served tea and refreshments, and one of them sheepishly thanked the maid who poured the tea into a cup. She calmly sipped her tea, realizing that Lotte was engaged to Klaus, and he nervously twirled the cup in his hands and cast short glances in her direction. The young man thoughtfully stirred his tea and explained that the engagement had most likely been broken off before the game's plot began, as it was never mentioned there. The guy sat at the table with a cup in his hands, thinking about the fact that the current time of events was taking place several years before the start of the game, and he grew gloomy, thinking about the future. He then remembered that at the beginning of the game, Lotte was in a wheelchair with a cold heart and a withdrawn personality, but gradually she became more friendly and was able to walk again thanks to the magic of the saint. Meanwhile, the two characters quietly drank tea across from each other, while the third man tried again and again to approach the heroines, but was always pushed away after Lotte broke off her engagement to Klaus. The girl drank tea with noticeable anxiety, and the young man next to her quickly explained that he would have committed many more bad deeds, and this would ultimately have led to a tragic outcome. He resolutely declared that he must avoid the death flag at any cost, but at that moment the sound of crockery was heard, which caused a surprised reaction. The guy sheepishly admitted that he had poured too much into his cup and realized that he had completely ruined the mood of the girl sitting next to him. After this, the girl anxiously thought about how to correct the awkwardness, and at that time the two maids awkwardly exchanged glances, one trying to encourage the other. Soon the girl quietly took out a handkerchief, and the boy laughed and thanked Anna, confirming his words with genuine enthusiasm. The young lady reproached Klaus, declaring that she no longer understood him, and accused him of always looking at her only as a tool, tightly clutching her handkerchief at the table. She noticed that the guy was unusually kind today and asked him why he was acting like that. Then the dark-haired girl reacted with shock when the young man admitted that he was thinking about changing, because he could not continue to act the same way as before. He was surprised that she believed him, and then happily confirmed her trust. Soon the girl firmly demanded that the guy lose enough weight in a month to make it immediately noticeable, and he reacted to the condition with fear and sweat on his face. The young man remembered Duke Garam Muller, Klaus's father, and a man nearby suggested that he should first consult with Garam-sama himself, causing the boy to look up in surprise. The boy anxiously asked to arrange a meeting with his father, and the servant agreed to clarify a convenient day, while the child himself reflected on their distant relationship and wondered what kind of person the head of the family was. He reflected on the fact that the Muller family's lands extended far beyond the familiar town, and that his mother, bedridden earlier, was now recovering in a remote place. The scene showed vast expanses and a majestic mansion in the distance, which represented the main residence of the Muller family, and one of the characters was amazed at its size, comparing it to 1,000 Tokyo domes. The boy then thought that his parents had probably abandoned him, and then noticed that Klaus was practically isolated here. The boy ran up to the porch, breathing heavily, and the uniformed maid said happily that he must be tired. He took a sip from the bottle and thanked her gratefully. The young man noticed how the girls were whispering about Klaus, doubting whether he had really changed and whether he would be able to withstand the diet for a whole month, while sympathizing with Lotte. The guy wondered if Anna had treated Klaus badly, then asked her why she was now so kind to him, while a girl next to him enthusiastically encouraged him. Then one of the girls remembered how she was taken in as an orphan and owed her life, and the man imagined her future beauty, while another nervously mentioned Klaus. The young man sheepishly explained that he had plans to meet his father and asked her to go with him, causing her obvious surprise and shock. Soon the girl in the pointy hat expressed concern about meeting his father, and the boy himself admitted that he could not leave things as they were, understanding the tension in their relationship. With warm words, she told the young man that he had really changed and that sooner or later someone would definitely recognize him for who he was. Then he thought about how Anna now trusted him completely, and he admitted to himself that he wanted to justify her kindness. The guy happily said he was incredibly excited about preparing his presentation for the scales, but suddenly panicked when he realized he didn't have a computer or PowerPoint. After this, irritated by the impossibility of writing with quills, he sighed heavily and decided to express his thoughts in the old-fashioned way, accidentally dropping a drop of ink on the sheet. A few days later, he arrived at the massive main mansion, amazed by its size, while two servants warned him to be careful just outside the entrance. The man encouraged the boy, wishing him success, and the figure next to him announced that Garam-sama would make a decision based on today's behavior, which astonished everyone gathered. One of the people politely asked to pass, after which a close-up of the face of a bearded old man with a stern, frightening expression was shown, which caused shock. The tall man greeted them and the boy exclaimed in amazement at his height, while the woman tried to calm him down and the other man asked a clarifying question. The young man explained the significance of the Muller family's nightly tactics, and his interlocutor questioned whether weight could be judged by appearance, prompting the young man to recall his corporate sales skills. The boy then told the astonished man that eating a pound of meat does not immediately mean excreting a pound of waste, as weight naturally fluctuates daily through digestion. The young man added that losing just 2 pounds speeds up the rider's horse by 0.2 seconds, but that excessive weight loss makes it difficult to move an armor, and the elderly listener nodded thoughtfully. Meanwhile, the confident man acknowledged the plan was sound, and the boy gathered his courage and said that he would use a touching story to finally convince their opponent. He turned to his father with tears in his eyes and explained passionately that the scales had been created for the future benefit of the Muller family, putting all his sincerity into his words. Soon the young man joyfully declared his desire to be of use to his father, and he, after listening in silence, immediately agreed to approve the production. The young man enthusiastically explained that the device's basic principle was based on a spring. The man clarified what mechanism would be used, and the boy sincerely thanked him for his interest. One of the men carefully examined the drawing and decided to give it to the scientist for verification. At that moment a woman in a white coat entered, noticing the presence of another interlocutor. The girl with long blonde hair looked at the scales with curiosity, and the boy with dark hair asked in surprise if these were really them. The woman with glasses noted that the idea was worth considering and worth trying. The cheerful young man happily agreed to start immediately, and another person encouraged him. Then the woman in glasses said the work would take about a month, given the materials, and asked them to wait for the results. The man warmly remarked that the boy had changed greatly. Stroking his head, the young man looked up as someone left. The man hugged the child tightly, praising him for such a bold proposal at 10 years old. Then the man, with tears in his eyes, asked not to disappoint him anymore, remembering past worries about his son's future and realizing that Klaus had simply been acting stupid back then. The girl assured her father that everything would be fine now, feeling hope and believing that their relationship was slowly moving towards a happy ending. Meanwhile, another young lady was happy for Klaus, who was tired after a 4-hour carriage ride, but warned that he would soon be called back to the main mansion because of his father. She thought quietly, and then encouraged the boy lying in bed, who promised to do his best to earn pride, and heard that support would be there, even from afar. The girl reflected that there were many experienced maids serving in the main residence, so a clumsy one like her would be fired when she was no longer needed, which greatly surprised the boy. The young man hastened to reassure Anna, declaring that no one was firing her and that she would forever remain his personal servant. The girl anxiously asked if she herself was sure, since she didn't want anyone else. She thanked him with tears in her eyes, and he assured her that they could handle everything together, after which she said goodnight with a grateful smile and left. Soon a dark figure burst through the window, finding the boy confused and anxious as the intruder approached aggressively. The man was drinking loudly, and the maid, hurrying down the corridor, apologized for oversleeping. Night Captain Mukai scolded Klaus for being sleepy, and someone nearby winced as the boy fell, hitting his face on the floor. One of the instructors explained that he had been assigned to teach the young man fencing. The boy excitedly agreed, recalling that he had seen the races but had never sat in the saddle himself. The teenager found it difficult to hold a real sword. Its weight surprised him, and the instructor adjusted his stance and encouraged him while the boy recalled scenes from mecha anime, trying to compose himself. The boy demonstrated a stance with a sword without a shield, but the man corrected him, insisting that he try to attack, despite the fear of getting hit. Soon the young man confidently parried several of the swordsman's attacks and noted that although he had watched historical dramas, a real fight felt completely different from samurai battles on screen. The young fighter demonstrated Western swordsmanship, explaining strikes and lunges, while his heavily armored opponent reminded him that strength always plays a decisive role. The boy struggled to cope with his small stature, and his tall opponent praised his efforts, but then deftly knocked the weapon out of his hands, causing the young man to stagger back. Suddenly, the sword in the young man's hands began to glow, and mysterious symbols flashed in his mind, while his opponent suggested ending the fight with a real weapon. The boy quickly asked for another try, and the soldier agreed to end the fight after this time, so the boy rushed forward with full determination. The enemy then quickly dodged several quick attacks, hoping to confuse the boy with his speed, as he was inferior in strength, while simultaneously choosing which side would be more convenient to defend himself from. Meanwhile, the determined girl rushed forward with a blade, and the man shouted for her to strike in one decisive move. She explained that the technique had popped into her head for no apparent reason, and the man was surprised, thinking that it might be a rare, special skill available only to a select few. The young student timidly inquired about the difference between common and unique skills, then admitted that she had read about it in the library, and the mentor responded animatedly to her words. After the writer quickly disappeared, the young man insisted on reporting the incident to Garam-sama, but the girl assured him that nothing terrible had happened and praised his abilities. Soon he complained of hunger after training, and she, noticing his embarrassment, found it cute, promising to cook dinner, unable to resist a little tease. The girl gently reassured Klaus, telling him to remain himself even with his new abilities, but he nervously denied the fear of returning to his old image. The young man assured her that there was nothing to worry about, because he was no longer cruel and would never become so again, after which he referred to the need to go out, and she watched him closely, quietly calling his name. The boy noted that his swordsmanship had noticeably improved and unlocked a new skill, Storm Strike, then took out a skill book in the forest, making sure no one was nearby. He looked through the list and noted that he had disabled the lazy sleep ability to help himself with his diet, but decided to keep the unique skill a secret so as not to cause unnecessary noise. Soon the day of the promised meeting with Lotta arrived. The slender young man admired his body, catching his breath, while the girl asked him to remain calm. The young man warmly invited Lotta to sit down, and she looked surprised and hesitant, confused by his friendly gesture. He noticed her obvious weight loss and asked if she now believed his words, while the girl listened silently, sitting on a chair. The guy thought that the old Klaus would certainly have used his status to force an engagement, but noted that she was still not ready to open up to him. The young man angrily called Klaus a fool for mistreating his beloved heroine, and then quietly admitted that he dreamed of helping her become herself again, sitting next to the calm girl. She promised to believe in his determination to change and vowed to express herself sincerely, and he thought the situation was starting to get out of control. The young man suggested starting with a smile to ease the conversation, and his interlocutor awkwardly tried to force one, feeling awkward but trying her best. The guy promised that if Lotta couldn't smile, he would do it himself, and unexpectedly showed her a game of peekaboo, which surprised the girl, while the man standing next to her doubted that such a technique would work on the lady. The girl smiled warmly, noticing that his sincere desire to amuse her was obvious, and the young man watching nearby noted her charming smile with admiration, calling her his favorite heroine. The young man then admitted that he had taken a step forward, while the maid listened silently with a tray in her hands, and then the scene changed. The two continued their leisurely conversation at the table. The girl invited Klaus to sit down, slightly teasing him for being too polite. He reacted with surprise, and she thought about how many would appreciate him in the future. Meanwhile, the young man was worried that he had caused her new anxiety, but she awkwardly apologized, calling herself a bad servant, and he realized that she was still a child in front of him. He assured Anna that she was not a bad maid at all, and then asked her to help him fall asleep, and the girl, embarrassed, promised to do everything possible. The girl quietly sang a lullaby, settling down next to the boy, who was surprised at first, but then accepted her concern and wondered if they would really sleep together. She hummed a song about a quiet forest and dancing shadows, and he, listening to the serious lines, yawned while her voice continued to lull him. Soon, the blonde girl was softly singing a calm melody to the sleeping child, closing her eyes and leaning closer in a touching moment. During a thunderstorm at night, a caged man asked if Klaus was the bearer of the ability, to which the other man angrily demanded an explanation. Then one of those present sharply ordered that he be called here immediately, and the tense expression on his face clearly showed the seriousness of what was happening. 3 weeks had passed since his tea with Lotta, and he continued to stick to his diet and exercise outdoors, noting that without the internet and games, all that was left was training. The young man clenched his fists and firmly promised to go all the way, to return her trust and smile, and in his imagination the image of the girl softly appeared. He announced his intention to take the skill test at the main residence and immediately responded to the call when it was time to leave. On the way, the boy considered whether to activate the skill again in order to gain weight and improve his appearance, and soon arrived at a majestic building and introduced himself to his father, accompanied by others. The menacing man acknowledged Klaus's arrival, commenting on his imposing presence, while the shorter man standing next to him reacted with surprise. One of those gathered informed the young man that word had come from Mukai about the awakening of the skill, confirmed its presence, and apologized for the delay while the others watched. Then they explained that before them was Cardinal Naruka, who had come from the capital to evaluate the boy's skills, and the father bowed his head respectfully. The young man also bowed to Cardinal Narek, acknowledging that his power was equal to or even superior to that of the Marquis. The young man introduced himself as the eldest son of Marquis Muller, and the two men noticed that he had changed and was not at all as the rumors described him. Two of the interlocutors discussed how his changes might be connected to the awakening of a powerful skill, and the other happily noted that this was precisely what explained his newfound prudence. The elder explained the principle of the Oracle Crystal as a magical tool for testing skills, then told the young man to place his hand on the surface, and he checked to see if he was doing it correctly. The boy reacted with delight to the magically lit scrolls, noticing that everything was happening as if in a fantasy novel, while mystical symbols hovered around him. Then he noticed that only the names of the skills were displayed, and the skill book was missing, and he realized that this could be a convenient opportunity to explain to his father. Meanwhile, the young man watched with alarm as the old man suddenly began to choke, asking in fear if everything was okay, while the small animal nearby fell silent. The two men were confused when they heard about two abilities, and the boy nervously asked if this was an aberration, to which one explained that only a few people had two abilities. One trembling man quickly told Klaus that he might be marked by God himself, and Klaus calmly agreed, while the onlookers watched in awe, and the youth himself regretted that he had not hidden his lazy sleep. After this, one man asked the other to keep the secret and promised to tell only his father, and the boy was surprised by the very mention of such a high-ranking cleric. The young man soon felt the full weight of the moment when an influential cleric placed his hand on his shoulder and expressed the great hopes placed in him. Then the servant offered to escort the wrapped figure to the carriage, and the two assistants bowed and left, after which the doors closed behind them, and the boy and the man silently watched their departure. A woman blocked the way at the threshold, joyfully greeting Klaus, and the two people nearby became surprised and wary when they heard her mention scales. The confident lady suddenly leaned closer to her embarrassed interlocutor, declaring that the fight was over, and then admitted to having poor eyesight and questioned whether his glasses were fake. Eisen inquired about the plans for mass production and distribution, to which Klaus replied that they needed to make sure there were no problems first, while Lucen expressed a desire to try it out right away. The young man explained that he would first collect information to form a rough idea of sales and production, and then walk around the city to consolidate the plan. After discussion, they decided to attend the kingdom's founding celebration the following week, noticing that there would be a particularly large crowd there, and this was a good opportunity, which caused great delight in the boy. A week later, the three enjoyed a noisy celebration with music and confetti showers, celebrating the joyous founding day of the Kingdom of Garluk. At a busy market, a girl offered bloody rabbit soup and orc skewers, but the boy didn't believe it was edible. Then the man explained that those unable to fight should remain in the city, as meat was obtained from the monsters that hunted in the forest, and adventurers were needed to protect or destroy the creatures. One guy excitedly told Klaus that adventurers take quests from the guild, and Klaus listened calmly without interrupting. The young man then listened with interest while the other explained that Garam admired adventurers, traveled a lot in his youth, often skipped school, and for this was repeatedly reprimanded by grandfather Klaus. The young man expressed a desire to visit the Adventurers Guild, and his companion agreed to show it around briefly on the way across a busy street. The crowd inside the tavern merrily rattled mugs and shouted toasts, while outside, three newcomers watched warily, noting the noisy atmosphere and the rude patrons. Inside the crowded establishment, the young man looked around anxiously, remembering how he had once been robbed in high school and comparing the crowd to hooligans in arcades. The man with spiky hair angrily asked the boy why he had come to such a place, and he hesitantly explained that it had all happened almost by accident. One man then warned the young man not to approach strangers too easily, and then struck the figure hard while a woman with long hair watched from a distance near armed guards. At this time, the man in black defiantly drew his sword, and another angrily asked what was wrong with him, and a shocked woman nearby watched what was happening. One of those present told the boy to leave the matter to him, being confident in his abilities, but he insisted, considering this a good opportunity to test his own strength, while a woman watched from afar. The young fighter challenged his opponent to a fight, promising not to hold back, while the other two held their weapons at the ready and the man behind them watched calmly. The confident warrior ordered the crowd to stay away from the frightened child, standing firmly with her hands on her hips and her sword at her waist. A hot swordswoman named Amira rushed forward, but a man called out to her, demanding that she not interfere, while another noted that this youth did not know how to restrain himself at all. The girl then worried that she might have accidentally killed him, acknowledged that he was significantly weaker than Mukai, and reconsidered her previous fighting spirit. Soon the man furiously refused to lose to some boy, but suddenly found himself defeated and pinned by the throat by a tall woman, causing surprise among the boy and the spectators. She praised his courage to behave calmly around adults and added that it was also a woman's intuition, and he asked in bewilderment what that meant. The figure with long hair and gloves leaned closer, telling the interlocutor that he had something special, and the interlocutor, confused, did not understand what he was talking about. Marvelia confidently announced that she would take over the training hall and told the young man to follow her, and he anxiously wondered what quality she meant. The girl warned that if she ever found herself next to someone halfway to death again, she would take money for treatment. The man with horns found such casualness frightening, and the curly-haired woman offered to put everything on her account. The man explained that the guild's training facilities resembled a dojo and handed over a wooden sword. The young man asked again and agreed to have just one duel before leaving. The nervous boy wondered why so many people had gathered and realized with horror that they viewed his life as entertainment while the crowd eagerly placed bets. One of the men announced that the fight would begin when the copper coin fell, and at that moment the woman attacked swiftly, stunning her opponent with her speed. Rina deftly dodged the blow and confidently thought that her speed had also increased after losing weight. Rina furiously rushed into attack with a flying kick, but the man intercepted her and threw her to the side. Then she snatched the sword right out of the air, and he was already preparing to rush after her. The explosion scattered several people, throwing them into the air, and a girl immediately rushed to Klaus, who assured her that he was okay, despite the chaos around him. The warrior lifted the young man into his arms, and he pondered the power of the S-rank adventurer's strike, while Marvelia quietly wondered if it was really him. The guy was tormented by the question of what to use, but his companion irritably ordered him to use force quickly, to which he replied that he was not ready yet, and she sighed tiredly next to him. The girl then revealed her secret, stating that her skill was related to the power of fire, and that was why she was nicknamed the Blazing Swordswoman, confidently adding that her intuition was always correct. The young man gripped the hilt of his sword, declaring that he would put all his strength into the blow, and, concentrating his inner power, he was sure that it would not kill her. She threw a stream of fire and he quickly dodged, after which she rushed forward and he jumped high into the sky, preparing for the next move. Their blades clashed in a furious clash, flames swirling through the air as two onlookers watched on the edge in shock and alarm. She then turned to the boy, apologizing and stating that she had work to do, after which she dealt him a powerful blow. The woman with the sword raised the crowd to cheers as a squad called the Golden Doom Brigade prepared to march out, and the man smiled as he noted the sonority of their name. The young man enthusiastically declared that he wanted to fight monsters, to which the elder man reacted sharply, and the woman confirmed that this was probably part of the job description. The curly-haired warrior refused to take on someone who was not registered as an adventurer, but the boy eagerly asked to be registered, and the girl with long hair handed over a piece of paper, using the man as a table. The young hero presented the document to the man, demanding the guardian's signature, and the girl agreed with him, while the man insisted that they return home that very day in exchange for the consent. The maid warned him that Latte-sama was arriving tomorrow, and the young man, suddenly realizing it, called her a child, and she playfully corrected him to address her as Klaus-sama. The crowd in the circle knelt as a man made signs on the ground, a girl in a dress watched in confusion, and another screamed in panic, hastily apologizing for her impudence. He admitted that he had sneaked in today and asked them to keep it a secret, which the others happily agreed to. The guy was stunned, assuming that Latte was standing in front of him. He insisted that it was a bad dream, and, clutching his chest, admitted to an anxious premonition. The girl called Anna, and then the young man asked if she had managed to find Klaus, and she answered negatively. She explained that he was going to read in the garden, so she gave him some jam biscuits, but she didn't see him again, to which the boy thanked her. The servant quickly brought the news to the man in the suit that Klaus's horse was missing, and the woman noticed the abandoned book he was reading and wondered if he had gone alone. The young man raced on his horse, thinking to meet her at the edge of the forest, but, riding closer, he realized that she was not there, as was usually the case. Soon he felt a sense of unease in the thicket and remembered that there were monsters beyond the village, after which he spurred his horse even harder, deciding to face whatever lay ahead. After an hour of travel, one of the companions asked where to head, and at that moment another called out to them from afar. The armored woman greeted Klaus, calling him a boy, and a young man standing nearby enthusiastically pointed to the Dune Brigade approaching on horseback. Rina asked what he was doing there and heard that she was returning from work. The girl was surprised that she had been working since the evening, and the warrior confirmed that she hadn't slept a wink and was exhausted. She told me that nearby, monsters attacked 3 merchant carts, and although they fought all night, one orc still managed to escape. Marvelia asked if anyone had seen the noble's carriage, but received a negative answer, and then they decided to return to the city, replenish supplies, and at least get some sleep. The squad, yawning, explained that the authorities were investigating yesterday's incident and had blocked the road, and the young man realized that he couldn't go that way, thinking about another route. The idea of going around the Zizinia Mountains came up in conversation, but he suddenly remembered the monster invasions that had occurred there, which alarmed the others. Then he realized that the frequent appearances of monsters were forming a pattern, and he firmly declared that he had to go, and she tried to stop him, insisting that they go together. The boy abruptly ordered the group to return and call the guards, after which he spurred his horse and prepared to continue on his way. The writer shouted at the child not to take any risks until he caught up, and the story recalled Lotte's past wounds, received during such an invasion, which had left her unable to walk. The writer noted that it was already midday, and in 4 hours they had covered over 30 kilometers, which was equal to a whole circle around Yamanote. The girl encouraged the exhausted horse, persuading him to endure a little longer, admitting that her strength was also running out. The young man passionately declared that he would not allow the game's scenario to come true and would change the course of events at any cost, shouting Lotte's name. He was asked to wait by the horse, and he gratefully climbed into the saddle, but soon noticed that the carriage was pulled into the forest, which caused him amazement. A lone figure stood at the dark edge of the forest, as if looking into the abyss, and, noticing a trace on the ground, felt surprise and interest. He assumed that the passengers had jumped out before the carriage was pulled in and had managed to escape into the depths of the forest. The girl returned and, turning to the horse, said that she was close again, then asked if he could hear anything, explaining that horses were inferior to dogs in hearing, but were still quite sensitive. He estimated that horses could detect sounds up to 4 kilometers away, and added that Lotte could be within that range, but warned that it was extremely dangerous to go into the forest alone. The young man counted the coins, then confidently folded the map and told the horse that he had an innate instinct to return home, so he would find the way himself. The boy quickly ordered a mirror to be brought and immediately asked which tree would be best to climb, preparing for action in the forest thicket. The girl noted that the thick branches obscured the sky, making the day seem gloomy, and a heavy boot landed next to her. The young man struggled down the steep tree trunk, admitting that covering 4 kilometers had been much more difficult than he had expected, and he realized how difficult the wilderness was. Despite the sweat and fatigue, he stubbornly declared to himself that he had to go on, gripping the hilt of his sword and refusing to give up. With a blade in his hands, he walked through the thicket, confident in the correct direction, but suddenly he cried out in shock, slipping on the cliff. He noticed a dirty shoe in the grass and realized that it belonged to Lotte, after which he gathered his resolve to continue on his way. The girl asked if the vice captain was okay after the fall, but immediately screamed when something really scared her. She tried to get up and called for help, but not knowing where to go, she suddenly fell again, crying out in pain. A lone figure in a tattered dress, tears in her eyes, desperately cried out for help in the dense forest, her voice echoing in the silence. The young man clutched the find tightly in his hand and mentally asked Lotte to hold on, convincing himself that it was too early to give up. The frightened girl noticed a shadow with glowing eyes, and the dark silhouette wove a shining ball in its palms, increasing the tension. A young woman running through the forest screamed that someone was there, and a curly-haired rider on a horse noticed movement in the distance and looked up in surprise. The girl and the tall man ran through the thicket, out of breath, and suddenly she tripped over a tree root, falling while he turned around, continuing on his way forward. The monster rushed towards the frightened girl. She screamed and tried to break free, but the ugly paw was already reaching for her. The vicious creature leaped straight at her, and as she fell back, she desperately protested, trying to push the predator away. The enraged goblin rushed forward with a cry, waving his weapon, but his opponent deftly dodged, ducking into the forest thickets. She fell right onto him and whispered with relief that she had made it, and he, weakly trying to pronounce her name, carefully wiped away her tears, causing her to look at him in surprise. The young man stood warily before the monster, and she warned him not to give in to the emotions of their encounter. Next to him, he winced in pain. The man with short dark hair remembered how the hero in the game defeated the orc general with one blow, and doubted that he could repeat such a feat. The young man admitted that the battle with Amira helped him level up, and he was determined to give it his all when a monstrous enemy approached him in the forest. He quickly ordered Lotte to hide further away, warning her of the red-haired warrior's imminent appearance, then rushed at the orc, who was already preparing for battle, while the girl hurriedly crawled away. A fierce battle ensued. The determined fighter jumped and struck the monster, which, frowning, was about to use an incomprehensible move. Then he shouted that action was necessary immediately. The girl called out to Klaus in alarm as he, wincing in pain, tried to rise after the crushing blow that had fallen on him unexpectedly. The boy fought for consciousness, realizing that in this dangerous world the slightest mistake was equal to death, and, realizing his impending doom, he tried to retreat. Klaus lunged forward with his sword, determined to strike from below, and prepared to meet the powerful thrust against the crumbling stone monster. He planned to go around the huge enemy and cut the tendon, trying to stay out of sight. The boy noted that his blade had been thrown aside, but at the same time he had managed to seal the monster's right hand, which had confused the mighty monster. The girl made her way unsteadily through the forest, out of breath and thinking that Klaus had come to save her, but she herself felt only helplessness and could only hide while he fought desperately. The young man leaned against the monstrous hand, realizing with annoyance that this struggle seemed endless. The short figure held his breath as he waited for the moment, deciding to take the risk only at the last moment, when a large enemy and a pack of wolves were rapidly approaching. Rina rushed straight at the mighty orc, shouting that now was her chance, but he responded with a furious counterattack, and she was forced to admit that the general was too strong. The boy noticed a falling stone nearby, thought it might belong to the dog-like monster, and then realized it was a magical stone that could be extracted from the bodies of monsters. The young man concentrated with all his might and mastered the ordinary skill in partial magic, which, at the first level of mastery, unlocked the skill body strengthening. The monster sank its teeth into the spiked weapon, and the wounded and tired young man firmly believed that his new skill would finally allow him to defeat the enemy.